Hey everybody, welcome to another book study by Northeast Christian Apologetics. I'm doing something a little different with the sound, so let me know if it is too loud or anything like that. Really appreciate you guys coming out and being a part of this. Just as a reminder, we are studying the book On Guard by Dr. William Lane Craig. Last week we introduced who Dr. Craig was and is, and last week we also read chapter 1. So today we're going to be reading through and discussing chapter 2, and the same format as before, where the book, you'll see the book right over there, and the chapter we're on, and right here is going to be the section of the chapter we're on, and right here is going to be the questions that we're going to be discussing. Sound is in a loop. All right, let me, James, you might need to restart, your video. I don't know if it's on my end. Let me mute and unmute real quick. So if anybody else hears a loop, let me know. I don't know, much else if I can do anything on my end. But so last week we talked about chapter 1, which was just an introduction to Christian apologetics. One thing that I want to inform you guys of is where you can find this book. You can get this book on Amazon.com. So like if you want to follow along and read this book as I read it and discuss the questions, and please, when I'm discussing the questions, I'm going to provide my input first. And during that time, feel free to enter in comments, giving your perspective or your questions or your reflections on the topic as well. Really appreciate that. You can also get this book at christianbooks.com. And so whatever is more convenient for you, or whatever you wherever you want to actually whoever you want to actually support, both options are available to you for getting the book. So if I'm glad to hear that the audio was fixed, James. So if there are no comments or questions or anything like that, we can jump into reading chapter 2 of the book. So let's see here. And I might not be able to see the comments from everywhere. So if the best place to actually comment would probably be on my Northeast Christian Apologetics page itself. I know that this video has been shared in a couple of places. I don't know if I received those particular comments. Let me see if, yeah, I don't think that I get comments from anywhere else except for my Northeast Christian Apologetics page. So, without further delay, let's go ahead and jump into chapter 2 of On Guard. So chapter 2 is titled, What Difference Does It Make If God Exists? And in this chapter, Dr. Craig decides to preface it with Ecclesiastes 2:11, which says, I considered all that my hands had done and the toil that I had spent in doing it, and again, all was vanity and a chasing after the wind. I also want to mention that last week, somehow I developed a cough, and it has persisted throughout the week. So if I have to cough, I apologize. I do have some water with me, and we'll get through this together. But so Dr. Craig starts off the chapter with, Jen and I were living in Belgium when the Soviet Union collapsed and the Iron Curtain fell. It was an exciting time to be speaking on university campuses throughout Europe when such historic, world-changing events were happening before our eyes. On a trip to St. Petersburg, formerly Leningrad, shortly after the change, I visited the famous Russian cosmologist Andrei Grib. As we strolled through the hermitage, viewing its splendid treasures from Russia's czarist past, I asked Andre about the massive turning to God in Russia that immediately followed the fall of communism. Well, he said to me in his thick Russian accent, in mathematics, we have something called proof by the opposite. You can prove something to be true by showing its opposite is false. For 70 years, we tried Marxist atheism in this country, and it didn't work. So everybody figured the opposite must be true. Part of the challenge of getting American people to think about God is that they've become so used to God that they just take him for granted. They never think to ask what the implications would be if God did not exist. As a result, they think that God is irrelevant. It doesn't matter whether God exists or not. So before we share with people evidence for God's existence, we may need to help them see why it matters in the first place. Otherwise, they just don't care. By showing them the implications of atheism, we can help them to see that the question of God's existence is so much more than merely adding another item to our inventory list of things. Rather, it's an issue that lies at the very center of life's meaning. It, therefore, touches each of us at the core of his being. Professor Gribe's proof by the opposite is also known as reductio ad absurdum. So, reduction to absurdity. This label is especially appropriate when it comes to atheism. Many philosophers like Jean-Paul Sartre and Albert Camus have argued that if God does not exist, then life is absurd. Admittedly, Sartre and Camus didn't take this to be a proof of the opposite, namely that God exists. Rather, they concluded that life really is absurd. Nevertheless, their analysis of human existence shows us clearly the grim implications of atheism. The absurdity of life without God may not prove that God exists, but it does show that the question of God's existence is the most important question a person can ask. No one who truly grasps the implication of atheism can say whatever about whether there is a God. Now, when I use the word God in this context, I mean an all-powerful, perfectly good creator of the world who offers us eternal life. If such a God does not exist, then life is absurd. That is to say, life has no meaning, no value, or purpose. So, we're up to the first section of this, where we're going to be talking about objectivity and subjectivity. And referring to the absurdity of life without God. So, first of all, objective versus subjective. Something is objective if it's real or true, independent of anyone's opinion about it. For example, water is H2O is an objective fact. Something is subjective if it's just a matter of personal opinion. Vanilla tastes better than chocolate is subjective. So, you can use these terms straight. You can use these terms straight by, or you can keep these terms straight by remembering that objective is like an object that is really there, whereas subjective is like a subject or a person on whose opinion something depends. So these three notions, meaning, value, and purpose, though closely related, are distinct. Meaning has to do with significance, while why something matters. Value has to do with good and evil, right and wrong. And purpose has to do with the goal, a reason for something. Okay, so my claim is that if there is no God, then meaning, value, and purpose are ultimately human illusions. They're just in our heads. If atheism is true, then life is really objectively meaningless, valueless, and purposeless, despite our subjective beliefs to the contrary. This point is worth underscoring since it's so frequently misunderstood. I'm not saying that atheists experience life as dull and meaningless, that they have no personal values or lead immoral lives, that they have no goals or purpose for living. On the contrary, life would be unbearable and unlivable without such beliefs. But my point is that, given atheism, these beliefs are all subjective illusions, the mere appearance of meaning, value, and purpose, even though, objectively speaking, there really isn't any. If God doesn't exist, our lives are ultimately meaningless, valueless, and purposeless, despite of how desperately we cling to the illusion to the contrary. So Dr. Craig is really Hi, David. So, Dr. Craig is really keying in on the ultimate side of purpose, value, and meaning. And that is a huge distinction here. Okay, that really needs to be understood. So if God does not exist, then both man and the universe are inevitably doomed to death. Man, like all biological organisms, must die. With no hope of immortality, man's life leads only to the grave. His life is but a spark in the infinite blackness, a spark that appears, flickers, and dies forever. Therefore, everyone must come face to face with with what theologian Paul Tillich has called the threat of non-being. For though I know now that I exist, that I am alive, I also know that someday I will no longer exist, that I will no longer be, that I will die. This thought is staggering and threatening, to think that the person I call myself will cease to exist, that I will be no more. I remember vividly the first time my father told me that someday I would die. Somehow as a child the thought had never occurred to me. When he told me, I was filled with fear and unbearable sadness, and though he tried repeatedly to reassure me that this was a long way off, that didn't seem to matter. Whether sooner or later, the unbearable fact was that I was going to die, and the thought overwhelmed me. Eventually, like all of us, I grew to simply accept the fact. We all learn to live with the inevitable, but the child's insight remains true. As Sartre observed, several hours or several years makes no difference once you've lost eternity. The universe, too, faces a death of its own. Scientists tell us that the universe is expanding and the galaxies are growing further and further apart. As it does so, it grows colder and colder as its energy is used up. Eventually, all the stars will burn out and all matter will collapse into dead stars and black holes. There will be no light. There will be no heat. There will be no life. Only the corpses of dead stars and galaxies, ever expanding into the endless darkness and the cold recesses of space, a universe in ruins. So at this point, Dr. Craig gives us a little poem by Stephen Crane that says, a man said to the universe, "Sir, I exist. However," replied the universe, "the fact has not created in me a sense of obligation." So this is what is the outlook for the universe if God does not exist. It's inevitable, really. My wife and I just listened to a radio story that was had this kind of topic in mind, and it dealt very much with what's called the second law of thermodynamics, which is talking about entropy, how it must continually increase, and how the universe is going to die, and that humans created a supercomputer that was that they were hoping would solve this problem, but the computer constantly came back with insufficient data for a meaningful response until the end. I won't spoil the end, but yeah, the very interesting things to think about. I have a bunch of blogs that talk about the problem of death's door, and I think that death can be used as a guide for doing worldview analysis. So I go into some detail about that in those blogs. But Dr. Craig continues, this is not science fiction. This is really going to happen unless God intervenes. Not only is the life of each individual person doomed, the entire human race and the whole edifice and accomplishment of human civilization is doomed. Like prisoners condemned to death, we await unavoidable execution. There is no escape. There is no hope. And what is the consequence of this? It means that life itself becomes absurd. It means that the life we do have is without ultimate significance, value, or purpose. So let's look at each of these. And the first one he jumps into is Sasha provided the story in the comments. It's called The Last Question. Really interesting. Sasha and I listen to the whole thing, and we've both found it very interesting and fascinating. Definitely recommend looking into it. It's it's interesting. The reason why I'm not really going into more detail about it is because the most fascinating part is at the end, and I don't want to spoil it. But if you do watch it, let me know and we can talk about it. I think it's really interesting. So we're up to the next section of the book. And this is actually a subsection of this section that we're on. So we're going to be talking about no ultimate meaning. All right, so if each individual person passes out of existence when he dies, then what ultimate meaning can be given to his life? Does it really matter in the end whether he ever existed at all? Sure, his life may be important relative to certain other events, but what's the ultimate significance of any of those events? If everything is doomed to destruction, then what does it matter if you influenced anything? Ultimately, it makes no difference. So we're up to the first question. And so the question is, have you ever felt the darkness of despair that your life is meaningless? How did you cope? And so I definitely felt this myself, especially when I fell away from Christianity and became an atheist. On the popular level, this is called existential dread, often. And I definitely distinctly felt this dread, but the way that I coped with it was in the Navy way, in which I did a lot of drinking, and I just hung out with friends, and I played a lot of video games with friends and family online. And basically, how I went about coping is by distracting myself from that question. It's like, well, there's not much I can do about it, so I'm going to just ignore it. So Du says, "Me too." Laugh out loud. And yep. As a matter of fact, Du and I played a lot of video games during that time. But when you become a born again Christian, those kinds of that existential dread, in a large way and for a long time, goes away. Now, you can have periods in which you question whether or not you have actually obtained salvation, and then you can have that sense of existential dread. But my study of the atonement has really helped in this regard, where if I ever am in a position where I think that, has God really forgiven me? Does God really want to become reconciled to me? I can look to the cross, and the cross is an undeniable expression of God's forgiveness to us. And so nowadays, I really don't have any existential dread. Now, I'm at the stage in my life where the only existential dread that I could have, or this darkness of despair, would be a result of me coming to question whether or not God exists. And right now in my life, I don't see how that could happen. I am more confident in God's existence than I am in a lot of the people that I interact with. So that's just my personal position on it. But don't forget to leave a comment so that we can discuss how you feel about it as well. Do you get the sense that there is a dread in your life, and how do you go about coping with it? Because everybody copes with these things differently. But all right, if there's nothing else, then we can move on. So Dr. Craig continues with, mankind is thus no more significant than a swarm of mosquitoes or a barnyard of pigs, for their end is all the same. The same blind cosmic process that coughed them up in the first place will eventually swallow them all again. The contributions of the scientists and the advance of human knowledge, the researches of the doctor to alleviate pain and suffering, the efforts of the diplomat to secure peace in the world, the sacrifices of good people everywhere to better the lot of the human race, all these come to nothing. This is the horror of modern man. Because he ends in nothing, he is nothing. But it's important to see that man needs more than just immortality for life to be meaningful. Mere duration of existence doesn't make the existence meaningful. If man and the universe could exist forever, but if there is no God, their existence would have no ultimate significance. I once read a science fiction story in which an astronaut was marooned on a barren chunk of rock lost in outer space. He had with him 2 vials, one containing poison and the other a potion that would make him live forever. Actually, let me bring something up here. Boom, boom. There you go. There's the sad spaceman. So he has 2 vials, one containing poison and the other a potion that would make him live forever. Realizing his predicament, he gulped down the poison. But then, to his horror, he discovered he had swallowed the wrong vial. He had drunk the potion for immortality, and that meant he was cursed to exist forever, a meaningless, unending life. Now, if God does not exist, our lives are just like that. They could go on and still be utterly without meaning. We could still ask of life, so what? So it's not just immortality man needs if life is to be ultimately significant. He needs God and immortality. And if God does not exist, then he has neither. All right, so the next thing that we can talk about is name some characters in films who have exemplified the absurdity of life. How do they convey the idea that life is absurd? So keep in mind that I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. So when I think of this, I can't help but think of a film called A Clockwork Orange. And particularly, I'm thinking of the character Alex DeLarge, and this guy. So he's a young delinquent who indulges in acts of extreme violence and quote unquote ultra violence. The film explores the absurdity of a dystopian society's attempt at moral rehabilitation through controversial and dehumanizing methods. Alex's nihilistic worldview and the society's response underscores the absurdity of human nature and social systems. So what this underscores is that even if we are in a situation in which we're surrounded by people. Let's say that society was filled with people that lived forever. If God doesn't exist, then what's arguable is that we could be dealing with a society of people who dictate what morality is. And the society itself wouldn't have any purpose or direction or meaning just because a bunch of the people believe that a particular thing is right. What we need is some sort of being that has ultimate knowledge of everything, preferably omniscience or all-knowingness. And this being would be able to direct us in the right form of action and direction. And Dew says, the Joker from The Dark Knight, fantastic example. I am amazed that didn't come to mind. That's a perfect example. The Joker, his whole point is to like show the absurdity of society and the absurdity of the human nature as a whole. But really good example, Do. So if there's nothing else, we'll go ahead and continue on. So, thus, if there is no God, then life itself becomes meaningless. Man and the universe are without ultimate significance. So, Dr. Craig is moving on to the next thing that he wants to talk about, which is no ultimate value. No ultimate value. I'm going to drop that one down. Boop. All right, so All right, so continuing on, Dr. Craig says, if life ends at the grave, then it makes no ultimate difference whether you live as a Stalin or as a Mother Teresa. Since your destiny is ultimately unrelated to your behavior, you may as well live just as you please. As a Russian writer, Fyodor Dostoevsky put it, if there is no immortality, then all things are permitted. And I'll throw that up for you guys so you can see what I'm talking about. If there is no immortality, then all things are permitted. So the state torturers in Soviet prisons understood this all too well. Richard Wurmbrand, a pastor who was tortured for his faith, reports, the cruelty of atheism is hard to believe when man has no faith in the reward of good or the punishment of evil. There is no reason to be human. There is no restraint from the depths of evil which is in man. The communist torturers often said, there is no God, no hereafter, no punishment for evil. We can do what we wish. I have heard one torturer even say, I thank God, in whom I don't believe, that I have lived to this hour when I can express all the evil in my heart. He expressed it in unbelievable brutality and torture inflicted on prisoners. So given the finality of death, it really does not matter how you live. So what do you say to someone who concludes that we may as well live as we please, out of pure self-interest? Somebody might say that it's in our best self-interest to adopt a moral lifestyle. You scratch my back and I'll scratch yours. But clearly that's not always true. We all know situations in which self-interest runs smack in the face of morality. Moreover, if you're sufficiently powerful like Ferdinand Marcos or the Papa Doc Duvalier, or even a Donald Trump, then you can pretty much ignore the dictates of conscience and safely live in a self-indulgence. Historian Stuart Easton sums it up well when he writes, there is no objective reason why man should be moral unless morality pays off in his social life or makes him feel good. There is no objective reason why man should do anything save for the pleasure it affords him. But the problem becomes even worse. For regardless of immortality, if there is no God, then there is no objective standard for right and wrong. All we're confronted with is, in Sartre's words, the bare, valueless fact of existence. Moral values are either just expressions of personal tastes or the byproducts of biological evolution and social conditioning. After all, on the atheistic view, there's nothing special about human beings. They're just accidental byproducts of the nature that have evolved relatively recently on an infinitesimal speck of dust called the planet Earth, lost somewhere in a hostile and mindless universe, and which are doomed to perish individually and collectively in a relatively short time. Richard Dawkins' assessment of human worth may be depressing, but why, given atheism, is he mistaken when he says, there is at bottom no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but pointless indifference. We are machines for propagating DNA. It is every living object's sole reason for being. That's pretty depressing. So, we're up to the next question. Let's see here. So, how would you live if you believe that humans are simply machines for propagating their DNA? So, I used to think that I would behave harshly or terribly, but I'm not so sure. I know that if I truly believe that God didn't exist, then I would behave a lot worse than I do now. I've done some pretty terrible things in my life, and I know that the reason why I don't persist in those things is because I know that and not only that they're objectively wrong, but also because I'm going to be held accountable for those things that I've done, and I know that being good is more than trying to avoid negative consequences, but negative consequences are a good way of ensuring that people behave well and in accordance with properly ordered love. And so, like, even though you can be good without that stuff, a lot of people need that kind of motivation in order to stay good. So if I did think that humans were simply machines for propagating DNA, then that is what my goal would be to do, is to propagate DNA personally. So keep that in mind when you are talking with people, because this can be a motivating factor for other people as well for doing good. So Do says selfishly, but commands us not to be selfish. Yeah, God commands us not to be selfish. So when it comes to morality is something that's really difficult for us humans to kind of discover on our own. So I suspect that Do is saying that God commands us not to be selfish. So morality, moral features, the moral landscape is really difficult for us to ascertain on our own. So in order for us to really know that what the moral landscape really looks like, we need some sort of omniscient being to inform us of the moral landscape. And it's not enough for this being to be omniscient. This being also must be trustworthy, because an omniscient being can also lie to us. So luckily we have such a being in the form of God, who can tell us what true, upright, and righteous behavior is, what properly ordered love looks like, and for us to imitate that kind of behavior. So let me know if you guys have any personal insights, but if not, then we'll continue on. So Dr. Craig continues, in a world without God, who's to say whose values are right and whose are wrong? There can be no objective right and wrong, only our culturally and personally relative subjective judgments. Think of what that means. It means it's impossible to condemn war, oppression, or crime as evil, nor can you praise generosity, self-sacrifice, and love as good. To kill someone or to love someone is morally equivalent, for in a universe without God, good and evil do not exist. There is only the bare, valueless fact of existence, and there is no one to say you are right and I am wrong. So we're moving on to his next topic of focus, which is no ultimate purpose. So we're moving on from value and going on to purpose. So if death stands with open arms at the end of life's trail, then what is the goal of life? Is it all for nothing? Is there no reason for life? And what of the universe? Is it utterly pointless? If its destiny is a cold grave in the recesses of outer space, the answer must be yes. It is pointless. There is no goal, no purpose for the universe. The litter of a dead universe will just go on expanding and expanding forever. And what of man? Is there no purpose at all for the human race? Or will it simply peter out someday, lost in the oblivion of an indifferent universe? The English writer H.G. foresaw such a prospect. In his novel, The Time Machine, Wells's time traveler journeys far into the future to discover the destiny of man. All he finds is a dead earth, except for a few lichen and moss orbiting a gigantic red sun. The only sounds are the rush of the wind and the gentle ripple of the sea. Beyond those lifeless sounds, writes Wells, the world was silent. Silent? It would be hard to convey the stillness of it. All the sounds of man, the bleating of sheep, the cries of birds, the hum of insects, the stir that makes the background of our lives, all that was over. And so Wells's time traveler returned. But to what? To merely an earlier point on the same purposeless rush towards oblivion. When as a non-Christian I read Wells's book, I thought, no, it can't end that way. But if there is no God, it will end that way, like it or not. This is reality in a universe without God. There is no hope. There is no purpose. What is true of mankind as a whole is true of each of us individually. We are here to no purpose. If there is no God, then your life is not equivalently different from that of an animal. As the ancient writer of Ecclesiastes put it, the fate of the sons of men and the fate of beasts is the same. As one dies, so dies the other. Indeed, they all have the same breath, and there is no advantage for man over beast. For all is vanity. All go to the same place. All come from the dust, and all return to the dust. In this ancient work, which reads more like a piece of modern existentialist literature than the book of the Bible, the author shows the futility of pleasure, wealth, education, political fame, and honor in a life doomed to end in death. His verdict? Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. If life ends at the grave, then we have no ultimate purpose for living. But more than that, even if life did not end in death, without God, life would still be without purpose. For man and the universe would then be simply accidents of chance, thrust into existence for no reason. Without God, the universe is the result of a cosmic accident, a chance explosion. There is no reason for which it exists. As for man, he's a freak of nature, a blind product of matter plus time plus chance. If God does not exist, then you are just a miscarriage of nature, thrust into a purposeless universe to live a purposeless life. So if God does not exist, that means that man and the universe exist to no purpose. Since the end of everything is death, and that they came to be for no purpose, since they are only blind products of chance, in short, life is utterly without reason. I hope you begin to understand the gravity of the alternatives before us. For if God exists, then there is hope for man. But if God does not exist, then all we are left with is despair. As one writer aptly put it, if God is dead, then man is dead too. So he also provides us with another poem, and the poem is called, I have it right here on screen, Ozymandias. And I decided to watch a YouTube video that uses the poem, and they did an excellent job. I recommend looking into it, but I'll just read it here for you. I met a traveler from an antique land who said, 2 vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them on the sand, half sunk, a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculptor well those passions read, which yet survive stamped on these lifeless things, the hand that mocked them and the heart that fed. And on the pedestal these words appear, my name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sand stretches far away. So, our ancestry is filled with enormous and amazing structures, and many of them are just decayed rubble. So what is being said here is that this is the common result of humankind. Any of your great works, any of your great deeds are just going to be eroded away, and there's nothing we can really do about it. So we're moving on to the next section. So no longer the absurdity of life, but now we're living in denial. All right. So that's gone too. So what do you guys think so far? Is this a reasonable entailment of a godless universe? Is it actually the case that there is no ultimate meaning, no ultimate purpose, and no ultimate value? To me, I am inclined to agree. If we're talking in terms of ultimates, then yeah, I don't see how it's avoidable. But that's not to say that we can't find finite forms or subjective forms of significance, purpose, and value. But, and that might be enough to distract you from the inevitability of the end. But I've heard many people talk about witnessing people on their deathbeds, and a lot of them talking about regrets and the recognition of the futility of what they have done in their life. And I've also heard a lot of people talk about Christians on their deathbed and how they seem to have a peace about them that is distinct from people who aren't believers. I haven't been in a room in such a situation, but that's been a common feature that I've heard from people who have talked about this kind of stuff. So moving on to what Dr. Craig says here, living in denial. Unfortunately, most people don't realize this fact. They continue on as though nothing has changed. I'm reminded of the story told by the 19th century atheist philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche of a madman who in the early morning hours burst into the marketplace, lantern in hand, crying, "I seek God, I seek God." Since many of those standing about did not believe in God, he provoked much laughter. Did God get lost, they taunted him, or is he hiding? Or maybe he has gone on a voyage or emigrated. Thus they yelled and laughed. Then, writes Nietzsche, the madman turned in their midst and pierced them with his eyes. "Whither is God?" he cried. "I shall tell you. We have killed him, you and I. All of us are his murderers. But how have we done this? How were we able to drink up the sea? Who gave us the sponge to wipe away the entire horizon? What did we do when we unchained this earth from its sun? Whether it is moving now, away from all suns, are we not plunging continually, backwards, sideways, forward, in all directions? Is there any up or down left? Are we not straying as though an infinite nothing? Do we not feel the breath of empty space? Has it not become colder? Is not night and more night coming all the while? Must not lanterns be lit in the morning? Do we not hear anything yet of the noise of the gravediggers who are burying God? God is dead, and we have killed him. How shall we, the murderer of all murderers, comfort ourselves? The crowd stared at the madman in silence and astonishment. At last he dashed his lantern on the ground. "I have come too early," he said. "This tremendous event is still on its way. It has not yet reached the ears of man." So we're up to the next question. So this question is, let me get rid of the old one. Pop. Are there people you know willingly? Are the people you know willing to face up to the consequences of atheism? Why are they or aren't they? I think that there are people who agree with everything that Dr. Craig has said and do own up to atheism, but just are content with their the way that they have coped with the existential dread or the inevitability of their inexistence. And they're satisfied with that, or they've tricked themselves into believing that it's not a significant problem. People are definitely able to distract themselves from the consequences of a godless universe. So as per usual, don't forget to leave comments. It's a lot easier for me to interact with you guys when I know that you're there. Dr. Craig moves on. People did not yet comprehend the consequences of the death of God, but Nietzsche predicted that someday modern man will realize the implications of atheism, and this realization would usher in an age of nihilism, the destruction of all meaning and value in life. Most people still do not reflect on the consequences of atheism, and so, like the crowd in the marketplace, go unknowingly on their way. But when we realize, as did Nietzsche, what atheism implies, then his question presses hard upon us. How shall we, the murderer of all murderers, comfort ourselves? So now Dr. Craig. All right, so Dew says they don't believe there are consequences of atheism, but still believe in morality. Yep, there's a lot of people that believe in morality. A lot of people will believe in subjective morality, or they will believe in objective morality and just use a different explanation for objective features of morality. A lot of them will dive into Platonic entities or Neoplatonic entities. We won't be getting into that kind of stuff in this book. That's too advanced. But they a lot of people, when they're confronted with this, have already been living in accordance with roughly about what their nature would be anyway if God didn't exist. A lot of us actually do, as default, live as though we are atheists. A lot of Christians will do this too. A lot of Christians will live as though God doesn't exist. Even though they say that they believe in God, will nevertheless remain in sin of various times, not exercise spiritual virtues, not to do spiritual disciplines and stuff like that. So it's not surprising to see people maintaining the kind of behavior that they grew up doing. However, there are some people that do recognize the problem of atheism and will change their attitude and their behavior significantly, and they will start taking doing much more depraved things. It really depends on the person. So Dr. Craig is moving on to the practical impossibility of atheism. So this is the next section. So this is this section is going to be dealing with people who really understand the implications of atheism, and it's going to be exploring this attitude that we were kind of just talking about that do mentioned in the comments. So, about the only solution the atheist can offer is that we face the absurdity of life and we live bravely. The British philosopher Bertrand Russell, for example, believed that we have no choice but to build our lives upon the firm foundation of unyielding despair. I'm a big fan of Team 4-Star, Dragon Ball Z Abridged, and that line just reminds me of their version of Vegeta. But only by recognizing that the world really is a terrible place can we successfully come to terms with life. Camus says that we should honestly recognize life's absurdity and then live in love for one another. The fundamental problem with this solution, however, is that it's impossible to live consistently and happily within the framework of such a worldview. If you live consistently, you will not be happy. If you live happily, it's only because you are not consistent. Francis Schaeffer has explained this point well. Modern man, says Schaeffer, resides in a two-story universe. And I have a little graphic for you. Bop. A two-story universe. In the lower story, the finite world without God. Here, life is absurd, as we have seen. In the upper story are meaning, value, and purpose. Now, modern man lives in the lower story because he believes there is no God. But he cannot live happily in such an absurd world. Therefore, he continually makes leaps of faith into the upper story to affirm meaning, value, and purpose, even though he has no right to, since he does not believe in God. Let's look again, then, at each of the three areas in which we saw that life was absurd without God, to see how difficult it is to live consistently and happily with an atheistic worldview. So let's talk about the meaning of life. But before I continue reading, I'm just going to take a quick swig of water. All right, so the first area of meaning. First, the area of meaning. We saw that without God, life has no meaning. Yet philosophers continue to live as though life does have meaning. For example, Sartre argued that one may create meaning for his life by freely choosing to follow certain course of action. Sartre himself chose Marxism. So here's the next question that we have up. Boop. All right. Do you know anyone who thinks he can create his own meaning for his life? If so, how could you talk to him about whether this belief makes sense? So we have to remember that Dr. Craig here is talking about like ultimate meaning. He's talking about ultimate meaning and not subjective meaning. So when we think about this, we need to think of it in terms of that. So a person can create their own subjective meaning for their life. Like they can give themselves meaning and purpose, but ultimately speaking, there just isn't any. It's just a facade. But that's not what people think. That's not how people really live, though. People have a tendency to live as though their lives really do have objective meaning. And so how is it that you're able to create your own objective meaning? It doesn't really make any sense. Because if you create it yourself, then it is dependent on you, the subject. It makes no sense. So any meaning that you develop is and provide for yourself is subjective. It can't be objective because it's dependent on you, the subject. Okay? So we'll see how Dr. Craig tackles this himself. So so Dr. Craig goes on to say, now this is totally inconsistent. It is inconsistent to say life is objectively absurd and then to say you may create meaning for your life. If life is really absurd, then you're trapped in the lower story. To try to create meaning in life represents a leap to the upper story, but Sartre has no basis for this leap. Sartre's program is actually an exercise in self-delusion. For the universe doesn't really acquire a meaning just because I happen to give it one. This is easy to see. Suppose I give the universe one meaning and you give it another. Who's right? The answer, of course, is neither one, for the universe without God remains objectively meaningless, no matter how we happen to regard it. Sartre is really saying, let's pretend the universe has meaning, and this is just fooling yourself. The point is this: if God does not exist, then life is objectively meaningless, but man cannot live consistently and happily knowing that life is meaningless. So in order to be happy, he pretends life has meaning. But this is, of course, entirely inconsistent, for without God, man and the universe are without any real significance. All right, let's see what he says about the value of life. Yes, value. So turn now to the problem of value. Here is where the most blatant inconsistency occur. First of all, atheistic humanists are totally inconsistent in affirming the traditional values of love and brotherhood. Camus has been rightly criticized for inconsistently holding both to the absurdity of life and the ethics of human love and brotherhood. The view that there are no values is logically incompatible with affirming the values of love and brotherhood. Bertrand Russell, too, was inconsistent, for though he was an atheist, he was an outspoken social critic, denouncing war and restrictions on sexual freedom. Russell admitted that he could not live as though ethical values were simply a matter of personal taste, and that he, therefore, found his own views incredible. I do not know the solution, he confessed. The point is that if there is no God, then objective right and wrong do not exist. As Dostoevsky said, all things are permitted, but man cannot live this way. So he makes a leap of faith and affirms values anyway, and when he does so, he reveals the inadequacy of a world without God. The horror of a world devoid of value has brought home to me with new intensity several years ago as I watched a BBC television documentary called The Gathering. It concerned the reunion of survivors of the Holocaust in Jerusalem, where they rediscovered lost friendships and shared their experiences. A former prisoner, a nurse, told of how she was made a gynecologist at Auschwitz. She observed that pregnant women were grouped together by the soldiers under the direction of Dr. Joseph Mengele and housed in the same barracks. Some time passed, and she noted that she no longer saw any of these women. She made inquiries. Where are the pregnant women who were housed in that barracks? Haven't you heard? Came the reply. Dr. Mengele used them for vivisection. Another woman told of how Mengele had bound up her breasts so that she could not suckle her infant. The doctor wanted to learn how long an infant could survive without nourishment. Desperately, this poor woman tried to keep her baby alive by giving it pieces of bread soaked in coffee, but to no avail. Each day, the baby lost weight, a fact that was eagerly monitored by Dr. Mengele. A nurse then came secretly to this woman and told her, "I have arranged a way for you to get out of here, but you cannot take your baby with you. I have brought a morphine injection that you can give to your child to end its life." When the mother protested, the nurse was insistent. "Look, your baby is going to die anyway. At least save yourself." And so this mother felt compelled to take the life of her own baby. Dr. Mengele was furious when he learned of it because he had lost his experimental specimen, and he searched among the dead to find the baby's discarded corpse so that he could have one last weighing. My heart was torn by these stories. One rabbi who survived the camp summed it up well when he said that at Auschwitz it was as though there existed a world in which all the 10 Commandments were reversed. Mankind had never seen such a hell. And yet, if God does not exist, then in a sense our world is Auschwitz. There is no right and wrong. All things are permitted. But no atheist or agnostic can live consistently with such a view. Nietzsche himself, who proclaimed the necessity of living beyond good and evil, broke with his mentor Richard Wagner precisely over the issue of the composer's anti-Semitism and strident German nationalism. Similarly, Sartre, writing in the aftermath of the Second World War, condemned anti-Semitism, declaring that a doctrine that leads to mass extermination is not merely an option or matter of personal taste of equal value with its opposite. In his important essay, Existentialism as a Humanism, Sartre struggles vainly to elude the contradiction between his denial of the divinely pre-established values and his urgent desire to affirm the value of human persons. Like Russell, he could not live with the implications of his own denial of ethical absolutes. Neither can the so-called new atheist like Richard Dawkins. For although he says that there is no evil, no good, nothing but pitiless indifference, he's an unabashed moralist. He vigorously condemns such actions as the harassment and abuse of homosexuals, religious indoctrination of children, and Incan practice of human sacrifice, and prizing cultural diversity over the interests of Amish children. He even goes so far as to offer his own amended 10 Commandments for guiding moral behavior, all the while marvelously oblivious to the contradiction of his ethical subjectivism. All right, so next we're going to be talking about the, let me get this off here. So, why do you suppose that even smart atheists don't care that their ideas about right and wrong are inconsistent? So, keep in mind that I look forward to you guys' comments, but this one is this book is definitely designed for Christians. I have met many non-believers, many atheists who are very offended by this kind of idea, that smart atheists don't care that their ideas about right and wrong are inconsistent. They do care about right and wrong, and they do come up with clever ways in order to preserve their moral opinions, and in order to justify them as their opinions as actual moral facts, that if you disagree, then you are just wrong. But it really is hard to develop a worldview with objective features of moral values and duties without the existence of God. I think that a lot of people, we're all made in God's image, so we have a tendency to exist in a state of moral outrage when we see actions that are condemnable, or moral awe when we see something that's morally praiseworthy. And it's very hard to reject those notions of reality. So Pastor Randy says, human reasoning by nature is flawed and so has many blind spots. 100% right. Very true. That is an aspect of it as well, where it is we have many blind spots. And a lot of people are simply unaware of inconsistencies in their worldviews or inconsistencies in their reasoning. And philosophy and worldview creation or discovery is very difficult, and it requires a lot of slow thought and consideration. And a lot of people aren't interested in that, or they don't have time in it. Dew says the same reason they don't care that their entire belief system is predicated on no less than one miracle. Yeah, I assume that you're referring to the Big Bang, right? Where if you just grant me this one miracle, and then I can explain everything else, the Big Bang. Yeah. It gets very complicated, all this, and it could be the case that a lot of atheists will say that, there was the physical world isn't limited to the observable universe. And we'll be getting into that later on when we talk about the kalam and the contingency argument, but especially the kalam. But yeah, totally agree with you guys. So, all right, so Dr. Craig continues, indeed, one will probably never find an atheist who lives consistently with his system. For a universe without moral accountability and devoid of value is unimaginably terrible. So now he moves on to the purpose of life. Let me drop this. Boop. All right, so we are up to, there we go, purpose of life. Finally, let's look at the problem of purpose in life. The only way most people who deny purpose in life live happily is either by making up some purpose, or which amounts to self-delusion, as we saw with Sartre, or by not carrying their view of it to its logical conclusions. The temptation to invest one's own petty plans and objects with objective significance and thereby to some purpose to one's life is almost irresistible. For example, the outspoken atheist and Nobel Prize-winning physicist Steven Weinberg, at the close of his much-acclaimed book, The First 3 Minutes, writes, "It is almost irresistible for humans to believe that we have some special relation to the universe, that human life is not just a more or less a farcical outcome of a chain of accidents reaching back to the first 3 minutes, but that somehow we were built in from the beginning. It is very hard to realize that this is all just a tiny part of an overwhelmingly hostile universe. It is even harder to realize that this present universe has evolved from an unspeakably unfamiliar early condition and faces a future extinction of endless cold, or intolerable heat. The more the universe seems comprehensible, the more it seems pointless. But if there is no solace in the fruits of our research, there is at least some consolation in the research itself. Men and women are not content to comfort themselves with tales of gods and giants, or to confine their thoughts to the daily affairs of life. They also build telescopes and satellites and accelerators and sit at their desks for endless hours working on the meaning of the data they gather. The effort to understand the universe is one of the very few things that lifts human life a little above the level of farce and gives it some of the grace of tragedy." There's something strange about Weinberg's moving description of the human predicament. Tragedy is not a neutral term. It expresses an evaluation of a situation. Weinberg evidently sees a life devoted to scientific pursuits as truly meaningful, and therefore it's tragic that such a noble pursuit should be extinguished. But why, given atheism, should the pursuit of science be any different from slouching about doing nothing? Since there is no objective purpose to human life, none of our pursuits has any objective significance. However important and dear they may seem to us subjectively, they are no more significant than shuffling deck chairs on the Titanic. All right, so we're moving on to the next section, which is the human predicament. The human predicament. And we're also up to the next question. I can bring this down now. Boop. All right. Let's see here. So the next question is, think of a movie you've seen recently. If you ask the main character, why does your life matter? What do you think he or she would say? I promised myself that I would look into this question more before I came on here, and I totally forgot. But when I first read this question, the first person that came to mind was, the first movie that came to mind was the movie Encanto, where the main character is Maribel. And, excuse me. And this movie is filled with, like, magic and interesting features. But Mirabelle, if she was asked why does your life matter, she would reply, I suspect, that her life matters because of the people that she is surrounded by, her family and the people that are near the Encanto, the house that they reside in. That the surrounding people makes it so that her life matters. That was the person that came to mind when I thought about this. The movie is really interesting because the miracle that they obtained was a gift, but the grandmother thought that they had to somehow earn the miracle, and failed to appreciate it for what it was, and it was a gift. And the gift is actually, in my personal opinion, in the movie, a representation of just love. And in that way, it does correspond very interestingly with like Christian doctrine with regard to like our salvation, where we have salvation and we can have the idea that perhaps we need to earn the salvation, when in fact it is a gift, and it's completely unearnable to us, and any attempts to actually earn it would actually undermine the fact that the importance of it being a gift. And so while the grandma, is like trying to earn this gift, she's actually destroying it. So it's really interesting, that kind of stuff. But Dew says, Puss in Boots would say, because I am Puss in Boots. I saw the movie Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, and I love that movie. It's so good. That would be what Puss in Boots would say before, at the beginning of the movie. But later on, I don't think that he would have the same answer, because he kind of abandons the whole Puss in Boots persona. And I think that what he learns there is that his life matters because, again, of the relationships and the people that he has surrounded himself with. The dog and Kitty Softpaws. It's all about relationship, and what a lot of these movies have in common is love. That you can find meaning in your life through love. And what Christianity says is that the meaning that you find in life is obtained through properly ordered love. The love that you, and the unity that you have with your Creator, the person who you were designed to have a relationship with. So these movies are right in showing the importance of love, but they forget who we are designed to love the most. All right, so going back to the book, we are up to the human predicament. And don't hesitate to leave your comments whenever you want. I love to see the comments, and I love responding to them. And I'm sorry if I don't see your comments. It is Facebook. I might decide to move this study to YouTube. I don't know if it would be better there. Any suggestions would be highly appreciated. So let me take a real quick drink again. All right, so Dr. Craig continues on with saying, the dilemma of modern man is thus truly terrible. The atheistic worldview is insufficient to maintain a happy and consistent life. Man cannot live consistently and happily as though life were ultimately without meaning, value, or purpose. If we try to live consistently within the atheistic worldview, we shall find ourselves profoundly unhappy. If instead we manage to live happily, it is only by giving the lie to our worldview. Confronted with this dilemma, modern man flounders pathetically for some means of escape. In a remarkable address to the American Academy of the Advancement of Science in 1991, Dr. Rue, confronted with the predicament of modern man, boldly advocated that we deceive ourselves by means of some noble lie into thinking that we and the universe still have value. According to Rue, the lesson of the past 2 centuries is that intellectual and moral relativism is profoundly the case. He says that the consequence of this realization is that the quest for self-fulfillment and the quest for social coherence fall apart. This is because on the view of relativism, the search for self-fulfillment becomes radically privatized. Each person chooses his own set of values and meaning. So what are we to do? Rue says that there is, on the one hand, the madhouse option. We just pursue self-fulfillment regardless of social coherence. On the other hand, there is the totalitarian option. The state imposes social coherence at the expense of people's personal fulfillment. If we're to avoid these 2 options, he says, so we have no choice but to embrace some noble lie that will inspire us to live beyond selfish interests and so voluntarily achieve social coherence. A noble lie is one that deceives us, tricks us, compels us beyond self-interest, beyond ego, beyond family, nation, and race. It is a lie because it tells us that the universe is infused with value, which is a great fiction. Because it makes a claim to universal truth when there is none, and because it tells me not to live for self-interest, which is evidently false. But without such lies, we cannot live. This is the dreadful verdict pronounced over modern man. In order to survive, we must live in self-deception. That is sobering. So Dr. Craig is going to go on to tell us his story. The absurdity of life is more than just an academic affair. It touches us at the core of our being. I know. As a teenager, I felt deeply the meaninglessness of life and the despair that it brings. Although I had been raised in a good and loving home, we weren't a church-going family, much less a Christian family. But when I became a teenager, I began to ask the big questions of life. Who am I? Why am I here? Where am I going? In the search for answers, I began to attend a large church in our community. But instead of answers, all I found was a social country club where the dues were $1 a week in the offering plate. The other high school students who were involved in the youth group and claimed to be Christians on Sunday lived for their real God the rest of the week, which was popularity. They seemed willing to do whatever it took to be popular. This really bothered me. They claim to be Christians, but I'm leading a better life than they are, I thought. Yet I feel so empty inside. They must be just as empty as I am, but they're just pretending to be something they're not. They're all just a pack of hypocrites. I began to grow very bitter toward the institutional church and the people in it. In time, this attitude spread towards other people. Nobody is really genuine, I thought. They're all just a bunch of phonies, holding up a plastic mask to the world, while the real person is cowering down inside, afraid to come out and be real. So my anger and resentment spread towards people in general. I grew to despise people. I wanted nothing to do with them. I don't need people, I thought, and I threw myself into my studies. Frankly, I was on my way toward becoming a very alienated young man. And yet, in moments of introspection and honesty, I knew deep down inside that I really did want to love and be loved by others. I realized in that moment that I was just as much a phony as they were. For here I was pretending not to need people, when deep down I knew that I really did. So that anger and hatred turned in upon myself for my own hypocrisy and phoniness. I don't know if you understand what it's like, but This kind of inner anger and despair just eats away at your insides, making every day miserable. Another day to get through. I couldn't see any purpose to life. Nothing really mattered. One day when I was feeling particularly crummy, I walked into my high school German class and sat down behind a girl who was one of those types who was always so happy. It just makes you sick. So I tapped her on the shoulder and she turned around and I growled, "Sandy, why are you always so happy about anyway?" "Well, Bill," she said, "it's because I'm saved." I was stunned. I had never heard language like this before. "You're what?" I demanded. "I know Jesus Christ is my personal savior," she explained. "I go to church," I said lamely. "That's not enough, Bill," she said. "You got to have him really living in your heart." That was the limit. "What would he want to do a thing like that for?" I demanded. "Because he loves you, Bill." That hit me like a ton of bricks. Here I was, so filled with hate and anger, and she said there was someone who really loved me. And who was it but the God of the universe? That thought just staggered me. To think that the God of the universe should love me, Bill Craig, that worm down there on the speck of dust called planet Earth. I couldn't take it in. That began for me the most agonizing period of soul-searching that I had ever been through. I got a New Testament and read it from cover to cover, and as I did, I was absolutely captivated by the person of Jesus of Nazareth. There was a wisdom about his teaching I had never encountered before, and an authenticity in his life that wasn't characteristic of those people who claimed to be his followers in the local church I attended. I knew that I couldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Meanwhile, Sandy introduced me to other Christian students in the high school. I had never met people like this. Whatever they said about Jesus was an undeniable. Whatever they said about Jesus, what was undeniable was that they were living life on a plane of reality that I didn't ever even dream existed, and it imparted a deep meaning and joy to their lives, which I craved. To make a long story short, my spiritual search went on for the next 6 months. I attended church meetings, I read Christian books, I sought God in prayer. Finally, I just came to the end of my rope and cried out to God. I cried out all the anger and bitterness that was built up inside me. And at the same time, I felt this tremendous infusion of joy, like a balloon being blown up until it was ready to burst. I remember rushing outdoors in a clear Midwestern summer night, and you could see the Milky Way stretching from horizon to horizon. I just looked up at the stars and thought, God, I have come to know God. That moment changed my whole life. I had thought enough about this message during those 6 months to realize that if it were really true, really the truth, then I could not do nothing less than spend my entire life spreading the wonderful message among mankind. So we're up to the next question. Do you have a deep sense that your life matters? If so, what gives you that sense? If not, why do you suppose you don't? So for me personally, I do have a sense that my life matters. I contribute that to my faith, my pursuit of becoming more and more reconciled with God, which in Christian circles is typically called the process of sanctification. And you know, I have Northeast Christian Apologetics, and I also have things of that nature to keep me going, but also my family significantly. Being in a Christian household with my family helps me to feel like my life matters, and things of that nature. So I no longer live in a state where I no longer have a sense that my life doesn't matter. It only becomes the case that I get a sense that my life doesn't matter when I am actually not exercising my spiritual disciplines, when I'm not praying to God, when I'm not studying the Bible or doing things to progress myself, strengthen my virtues and things of that nature. And then I sense a distance between myself and God, and then sometimes I feel as if my life doesn't matter. But that's not often the case anymore for me. So Dr. Craig continues, for many Christians, the main difference they find in coming to know Christ is the love or the joy or the peace it brings. All of those things were thrilling for me too. But if you were to ask me what is the main difference Christ has made in my life, without hesitation, I would say meaning. I knew the blackness, the despair of a life lived apart from God. Knowing God suddenly brought eternal significance to my life. Now the things I did were charged with eternal meaning. Now life mattered. Now every day I could wake up to another day of walking with him. And I definitely feel that myself. Now, just as a reminder, this whole video is being recorded, so don't feel obligated to have to watch the whole thing in one sitting. You can come in and out as you please. This is just a live stream. You don't have to be here the whole time. So the book continues on for several more pages, and I'm going to continue reading them and discussing my thoughts and comments. So I don't want this to feel like a burden to anybody, but I will be reading the entire chapter tonight. And don't hesitate to leave comments, because I love to interact with the chat and with the people watching. But the next section of the book that we're up to is the success of biblical Christianity. So biblical Christianity thus challenges the worldview of modern man. For accounting to the Christian worldview, according to the Christian worldview, God does exist, and life does not end at the grave. Biblical Christianity therefore provides two conditions necessary for a meaningful, valuable, and purposeful life: God and immortality. Because of this, we can live consistently and happily within the framework of our worldview. Thus, biblical Christianity succeeds precisely where atheism breaks down. Now, none of this shows that biblical Christianity is true. The atheist might smugly say that I have embraced a noble lie and am self-deceived. So we'll examine the arguments for and against the existence of God in the following chapters. But for the time being, at least what we've done is to clearly spell out the alternatives. If God does not exist, then life is futile. If God does not exist, then if God does exist, then life is meaningful. Only the second of these two alternatives enables us to live happily and consistently. Therefore, actually, I'm going to tell you right now that we're basically at the end of the chapter. But therefore, it makes a huge difference whether God exists. Moreover, it seems to me that even if the evidence for these two options were absolutely equal, a rational person ought to choose to live in God or believe in God. That is, if the evidence is equal, it seems to me positively irrational to prefer death, futility, destruction to life, meaningfulness, and happiness. As Pascal says, we have nothing to lose and infinity to gain. But my goal in this chapter is actually more modest than that. By sharing the absurdity of life without God, I only hoped to have gotten you to think about these issues, to realize that the question of God's existence has profound consequences for our lives, and that, therefore, we cannot afford to be indifferent about it. If we can achieve that much in sharing with an unbeliever, we are well on our way. All right, and so that's the end of the chapter. So I shouldn't have said that, but I will make some closing comments here. Oh, by the way, let's do a little celebration because we got to the end of the chapter. Thank you for being with me. Hooray! We made it through the chapter together. Nice job, everyone. Thanks you for being here and studying this book with me. I really appreciate it. I love it. Just a couple of quick observations, and Dr. Craig is not going to be getting into this kind of stuff in the book, but he does mention it here at the very conclusion of this chapter, in which everything about worldview analysis is talking about which worldview is preferred. You need to be understanding, what is my worldview, and why should I prefer my worldview over and above other worldviews? And so, if it is true that these are the consequences of a godless worldview, then why should you prefer, if all the evidence is equal, why should you prefer that worldview over one that does provide ultimate purpose, value, and meaning? There's no reason to. And as a matter of fact, the evidence is not equal, because no atheistic worldview could ever be shown to be actually true. And there's a lot more to reality than Dew mentioned earlier, that if you grant atheists one miracle, but actually a non-Christian worldview requires an infinite number of miracles, and that's in relationship to unity and consistency and coherence. Like this universe, if God doesn't exist, there's no reason to suppose that chaotic worlds are impossible. And so if chaotic worlds are possible, then they comprise the vast majority of possible worlds. And so any sort of coherence that we actually see would itself be a miracle. And the amount of coherence and uniformity that we actually observe is absurd. It's absurd. And so no atheistic worldview should be preferred over any theistic worldview. What really needs to be the investigation of every person is which theistic worldview is true. That is what the real investigation should be. But anyway, like I said, I really appreciate you guys coming out and studying this book with me and going through the contents of it. I'll do a real quick prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for this night, and thank you for everyone who hopped in and viewed this video while I was streaming live, and please be with everyone who actually watches this video down the line as well. Please bless them and give them an understanding of the content of the book, and help them to meditate on it and glean wisdom from the expertise offered by Dr. William and Craig, and help us to use that knowledge to pursue an understanding of our own worldview and why Christian worldviews are to be preferred over other worldviews. And in Jesus' name I pray. Amen. All right. Thanks again, everybody. Really appreciate you coming out. I'll see you next week. This book study happens every Monday at 6 p.m. until the end of the book, and then we'll be moving on to a different book. Please like my Facebook page to be notified of the events and to see the live feed. You can also see the events on my website at www.nechristianapologetics.com. And also, I really appreciate the Patreon's supporters for Northeast Christian Apologetics. Thank you very much. If you would like to support my ministry, you can do so through Patreon or through Venmo. All right. Thank you, everyone, and God bless.